Welcome back to the Sports Business Virtual Summit. We've got a panel here talking a little bit different things. I actually don't know exactly where this panel is going to take us because we can go in so many different directions. We're talking digital, we're talking marketing. Obviously, with the world we live in today, it could go in a lot of different directions, but I'm cool with flowing like a sail in the wind and seeing where this goes. But we have Eric, who he can talk a little bit about himself, but he's running PR he started an agency himself, but he's also working with the Rugby Sevens, which initially attracted me to this. And then we've got Shane with Nike. Do you guys want to go around the room? We'll start with you, Eric, first, and kind of just give it a little introduction about yourself and kind of some things you had worked on as well as are currently working on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. Eric Nemeth, owner of Eric PR and Marketing, but I started my career with Comcast Spectacor. At the time, they owned the Sixers and the Flyers, and a facilities management company. Worked in Philadelphia, Portland, Oregon, Kansas City, then back to Philly, where I helped with the Sixers and the Flyers and the Spectrum before that was torn down a little while back. Then went to the Globetrotters, was with the Harlem Globetrotters for about a decade, oversaw their PR and a lot of their social for up until the pandemic hit, which did not treat a live event touring act that did not have a TV deal kindly. So that was shut down. As much of the sports entertainment world was in March 2020. And I didn't hesitate. Started my own agency right after a mass furlough took place. And off I went. Started working with some nonprofits and small businesses on a pro bono basis. And then started getting paid clients shortly after that. By the time I got to about July of last year, I realized this is what I wanted to do moving forward. And it's been a great journey. From a sports and entertainment perspective, I do have several clients in that industry, which has always been my core, obviously. One is Ripken Baseball, handling their content creation and social. Another is a startup called Jock Market, and they're in the daily fantasy space. They have turned sports into a stock exchange. So you can go on their platform and buy and sell shares of athletes in real time for real money. Started with them last July, and it's been fun to see them go from launch to their Series A. Just did a Series A round of $10 million a couple weeks ago, and helping them with their PR as well as their social. And then, as you referenced, Tim, have Premier Rugby Sevens, which is a brand new US-based sports league that I'll get into in a little bit. But we just announced that a couple weeks ago. We're going to have a pilot season in the fall featuring at least 8 plus members of the U.S. men's and women's national teams. They'll be competing in Tokyo. And then we'll come out of the Olympics and really ramp up to the start of the league in the fall. And then a full season will take place in 2022. So really excited about that. And it's been fun. I've always been a W-2 employee, so this is a new world for me in the last year plus. But I've really enjoyed it, and getting to work on a lot of different interesting projects.
That's great, and we've talked offline about this too. But we have one of our friends is Carlin Isles, who's in the face of rugby, if you will, around the globe, just because he's one of the fastest guys in the world. So I'm excited to kind of see that unroll. Shane, do you want to kind of introduce yourself, give us some background?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Shane Scott. Original background it was sports, so I've been a sports guy from the get. Played around the world, and finally grew up at one point and we realized that I wasn't going to make it to the bigs, no matter what league that was. So then started my journey with Nike, and started actually in California, their door, and then eventually went up to campus. And then the last 16-ish years been on the digital side, both from a internal, like our retail, Nike.com, and then the last 4 years have been out in the wholesale side. So I've seen both sides of our business, which has been great. And obviously digital is where everyone's going, and everyone's consuming content and obviously buying products. So it's been fun. My focus has always been sports, but then product. And then I didn't realize until I started working at Brand Jordan that it was the storytelling of that product is what I was in thrived with. A brand like Jordan that there you go, represent. Yeah. Jumpman. It's a brand that literally you don't have to put creative out. You don't have to do a video. You can just put the shoe and put the date, and people will most likely come by it. But the brand still saw massive value to storytell on that, right? And so I got intrigued with that in the role that I was in, and was like, oh yes, it's about storytelling. So the marketing side of what Nike does is the thing that's been most intriguing to me. It's the storytelling aspect that I've appreciated, and that's what my role has been probably the last 5 years.
I mean, there's probably no doubt. There's a lot of things you can argue, but as far as like Nike branding and marketing and that storytelling component, they're one of the best in the world, right?
Yeah, no, there's a reason why we spend the money, but again, we're relatively young, 40 some odd years, but the depth of history that we have to tell is phenomenal. And that's where, we might have advantage over some other competitors, is because we can bring that history, and you can bring that history that hits across generations, right? Yeah. And what better aspect to be under that umbrella to tell that story to not only the consumers of, say, my era, but now you're influencing or inspiring this younger generation that didn't know Michael Jordan or didn't know John McEnroe, et cetera. So it's fun to be playing in both of those realms.
Yeah, and you touched on the digital and wholesale side of things. Obviously, Nike's big push for e-com themselves. I know that you've pulled back from even some places. Are you involved with that? Can you talk about kind of the strategy and process around that at all?
Yeah, there's definitely a reset, right? You're resetting in the right way. From a business standpoint, you're trying to get rid of the long tail. Like, it's great to have massive distribution, have massive people telling a story or not telling a story or whatever. But when it came down to it, again, as a storyteller, right? The beauty of what Nike is, it's not just another shoe. There's a story behind that. And so you sort of lost that in some of these people that had it just because they loved the fact that it was a commerce play for them, but they weren't talking about the brand or the current moment. Like, the whole stuff we just dealt with in the pandemic, the exuding joy and celebrating that joy part of it. Some of those people might not have been about it because it's a transaction. So it was sort of resetting that and putting value in the people that tell the stories. Obviously Nike.com and people like DSG and those guys do, right? But who are the other people that are out there grinding brick and mortar digitally that are telling your story? Cool. Let's support them a little bit more, because we can't support everybody. Let's be more specific and thrive that way. So, obviously it makes it tough because we can't have our tentacles in every city everywhere, so you got to find the balance, but it just allowed us to be sharper with not only the support that we can give them, but the product per se.
Sure. Oh, that makes sense. And Eric, I know that, you said a decade at the Globetrotters. A big part of that was helping them grow their YouTube channel, right? So how are you able to from a storytelling, from these, you're not working with NBA athletes, you're not working with names, right? Like a LeBron James or a Michael Jordan, but you are working with very talented entertainers. How are you able to tell the story and build the social by utilizing that talent? Oh, you're muted, Eric.
So it's interesting with the Globetrotters. When I first joined the organization, they were still utilizing some of the legends and alumni like Curly Neal, who's since passed, but at the time in 2010s, he was still a face in terms of public relations. He wasn't playing on the court yet. There was a new crop of players, but they were still using him to get in the door to be relevant. So we had a big challenge on our hands. So we had to make our current players relevant as quickly as possible. So we had a few different ways that we did that, but the other challenge was the impression that the show was the same every year was a big hurdle. That you saw the Globetrotters once when you were a kid, you took your kids when you're older, you saw them twice, you're good. So from a media and social perspective, we always had to stay relevant and current. So one of the first things we did was we engaged with a lot of the Hollywood producers to get our stars on shows like The Amazing Race and Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? The Amazing Race example, we ended up having Big Easy and Flight Time on 3 different seasons. And then we were able to create some stars that way, where people were showing up and looking for Bull from American Ninja Warrior, or any of these shows that they are watching, and then build their profiles up from there. Then we had an interesting approach to bringing in some talent that had an existing following. So some folks that had, that really were in the social influencer space, that were also basketball players and entertainers, that they came to us with that following as well. So it's really that twofold effect, coming at it from building it internally and also bringing in some stars externally. And then we had to continuously evolve the storylines off of the court. So we were doing collaborations with Guinness World Records to, and that was some of, our anchor content that existed to really build some of those profiles. But then we were right there. With as Dude Perfect was growing, we were starting to grow as well. That they were getting the comparisons that they're the modern age Globetrotters, and then we would come in, and then some people were saying, well, looks like you guys are evolving a little bit like Dude Perfect. And we had that fun, the fun kind of back and forth, and even did a collaboration with those guys. But we were still live event focused at the same time. So we were doing 320 games in 250 cities, mostly in the span of 4 months. So we had to think of creative ways to promote those shows, but use that promotion to amplify us on a national level. And I'll give you an example. So we would play the Jersey Shore every year in Wildwood, and their big thing was to get their name in the news associated with the Globetrotters, which is this great brand. So we would do an insane trick shot, and that would be our focus of the summers. What were we going to do this year? So we did a trick shot from an airplane, a roller coaster, and a helicopter in 3 consecutive years. And every year, it would not only get us national coverage, it was important for our venue tenant. It was ticket selling, driving in order to build that awareness locally in the market to sell those tickets, and it really accomplished a lot of goals. And we would try to replicate that everywhere we went, whether it was in Madison Square Garden. If you've been to MSG in the last few years since their renovation, they have now the Chase Bridge, which spans across the top of the arena. We did a trick shot from there, which tied in with the building. We did another one the next year off the roof of the building. So, it was always that thought of, all right, how's this going to drive brand awareness, ticket sales, and be beneficial to our venue partners? So we had a few different goals there from the Globetrotters perspective.
Interesting. So you guys would try to create like a viral moment, right? This is at the very beginning of viral moments. And then I would imagine even now, like if Globetrotters started in 2019, it'd be even more successful because those viral moments. But you create that viral moment, gain awareness, local media as well as national media picks it up, and that'll drive the revenue on the back end. Ticket sales went up. Yeah,
I'll give you another way that PR kind of tied in with digital and the marketing side. But we had players at a Cavs versus Celtics game. And Coach Belichick came in and sat courtside, just around the same area that the Globetrotters were in. And we quickly strategized, swung by, spun the ball on his girlfriend's finger. He's cracking up laughing. Of course, we film it, release it, and we made Coach Belichick smile, one of those rare moments. And that
Belichick smiling goes viral every time.
It does. I feel like we were on the early wave of that. I feel like he smiles more often. Well, maybe not last year. But that was our number one piece of digital creative on the tour for 2 consecutive years. And we even used it outside of the New England region to sell tickets. But yeah, those moments were key. And then it's about amplifying it. Those moments happen, you capture it, but then what do you do with it? So that's about putting it into that marketing channel and marketing machine. In addition to when applicable, fitting in the sponsorship side as well. And that was the direction we were heading to. That if you look at the Dude Perfect model, they were built on sponsored content, and then they built out everything else from there. We were very live event ticket based. We're selling over 1 million tickets a year, and the sponsorship side was almost secondary, but we were making progress and building that in, so we could compete with those Dude Perfects of the world.
Interesting. And how are you taking that kind of viral moment or that story and funnel basically to how are you taking that over to the Rugby Sevens and the launch of that new league?
Yeah, so Premier Rugby Sevens, I started with them in January. And it's really interesting for a startup because you have a lot of different buckets that are going on. You have the funding side of things. You have some parallel conversations with who your broadcaster could be. You have parallel conversations about what venues you're going to play. So there was a lot of different thoughts about how we wanted to go about a launch. And for me, my advice to them was, look, we need to have enough newsworthy points before we go out publicly. There were some thoughts of people saying, well, maybe if we talk it into existence, some of these people will then start coming to us if we just promote our business model. But what we ended up doing was we really built up what our story was. And to Shane's point, storytelling was really key in this case. And for us, that looked at what is our DNA of this league? What's our mission? What's our vision? And the big thing that we have that really differentiates us, at least in year 1, year 2, is the idea of equal pay, regardless of gender. So we're really the first sports league in North America to launch with equal pay with men and women in the same league. And that was really key. So as our general manager, Mike Tolkien, who worked in USA Rugby as their head coach for several years, started to build the roster, it was important to make sure that we had at least close to equal representation between male and female with that announcement. And then it's about, and these initial players that came on, they're not only going to be stars of the league, but they're going to be ambassadors for the league as well. So the founder, Owen Skinnell, had a great vision there in terms of bringing them on with the idea that they'll support the league with their social platforms. You mentioned Carlin Isles has over 200,000 Instagram followers. Perry Baker is another one, 2-time World Rugby Sevens Player of the Year. So this is you don't usually think of America as a rugby powerhouse, but the Rugby Sevens team is legit. They can absolutely medal in Tokyo, and these are world-class, world-renowned players, as Perry has proven, winning that award 2 years in a row. So they all have a following. The women have a great following with Naya Tapper and Alona Marr and Abby Gustaitis, and they all engaged immediately. And we came and said, okay, we're going to put everything into one bucket on one singular day for our announcement. So the players were teed up, as well as embargoed stories on the PR side, a high quality video. And then we felt like, okay, we have this ready to go. And we announced, in late May, and it worked. We immediately caused a buzz definitively in the rugby community, which was our goal. And now once we're set in the rugby community, we're going to expand out and bring in those new fans that haven't seen Rugby Sevens before. And then they start to figure out that this is content they want to consume because the games are only 14 minutes long. Yeah. It's extremely fast paced. These are unbelievable athletes. It's easy to understand. If you understand American football, you'll definitely understand Rugby Sevens quickly. And then we start bringing in the other elements. We have we're narrowing down to the final candidates to launch in terms of a venue. We have a broadcast partner confirmed, which is one of the major sports networks, which we'll be announcing here in the next couple of weeks. And then, USA Rugby's been supportive of us as well. And then in conversations with gaming partners as well. So there's a lot happening, but it started with the foundation of that storytelling of what's our DNA and then growing from there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I went to, I don't know if it was like the World Cup or what it was. A couple of years ago, Carlin invited us. It was in Las Vegas to the Rugby Sevens. And we had no idea. I said, my brother and I, we had no idea that these were 7-minute halves. Right. And so we're sitting there and then we see the team leave after 15 minutes. We're like, is that halftime? Or what are we doing? We didn't realize. And then it was just like back to back to back. It's high intensity. It's great. And I think, hearing you speak about it, there's a lot of parallels to the Athletes Unlimited. Have you seen, I don't know if you've seen anything with like the softball, lacrosse, volleyball that they're launching with the Athletes Unlimited. And as far as like the fast pace, the energy, allowing the creativeness and storytelling, but also like the open eyes of like, okay, we have to be different because we want to get eyeballs and we want to attract people, because we know we have at the core, it's a good product, but how can we be creative to grab these other people? So definitely a lot of parallels to that. If you weren't a part of that, I would go listen to Sherry. It'll be on our platform here shortly from Athletes Unlimited. Great. Shane, welcome back. Technical glitch, I assume.
Thunderstorms,
Shane,
thunderstorms.
I'm curious to know. So if I have a brand and I'm just launching, storytelling is, if it's not at the forefront, it should be at the forefront of what you're doing in any brand, essentially. But I don't have marketing dollars. I don't have massive budgets like a Nike. What should I be doing? Or what potential ideas would you recommend? Because everyone has a phone at least, right, to capture. What are some creative ideas that I can do from a storytelling side if I'm launching a brand and I don't have massive budgets?
Yeah, you just said it. All of us have phones for the most part, and all of these phones have technology in it that are in $4,000, $5,000 cameras, right? And quite honestly, you can shoot it and be done with it right away. Where a camera, I've got to get it back off my camera, whatever. The biggest thing that you want to do is be true to your consumer, right? Whoever you're speaking to, be true to who you are, right? So if you're talking about starting a brand, to part of the conversation that happened today, you got to be able to explain your why without saying this is why I'm doing it. But at the same time, besides saying what you do or what you're providing, you need to share who you are, right? Because people in today's world, I can buy anything from anybody, right? I can get any kind of service from anybody. But what's going to make me choose your service over someone else's, or your product over someone else's, even though it might not be pricing, is who's the people behind it, right? What's their background? What's their personality, right? Do they walk into do I walk into their store and they're treating me like it's a museum and I can't touch or have a conversation with them? Or is it like I'm going to a local spot where I can go chop it up like I, would do at make it up a barbershop? Obviously, I haven't seen a barbershop in a minute. but that's what you have to do. You clearly have to articulate who's behind the brand, right? Besides the product or service. And it doesn't have to be polished. 100% doesn't have to be polished. Can it help? 100%. As Eric is probably saying, like it can, but it's not a must have. Like if you've got to, manage product, you got to manage, payroll per se or whatever, taxes, all that fun. You have to take care of those, right? You can't sit there and take 3K, 4K out of there and go storytell, but there's access to it. And quite honestly, you've got friends, you've got a network that probably has people that shoot, right? You just have to network and chat with people. And anything about this whole pandemic has taught us is people are willing to help each other, because we all know what the truth is and that people need help, not what the major media wants us all to believe. And people are willing to jump in and help, especially if you're in their community, right? And that's the biggest thing, is if you're not in this digital world and you have a hyper-local connection, then celebrate that hyper-local connection and bring the community or people within the community there. They're going to be willing to help because you're going to bring energy and awareness to their area. So I think that's the simplest thing, is just utilize the tools you got. And then as you build it, you're obviously then start creating budget to maybe once every 3 months shoot like a broader campaign, or maybe bring in a third-party agency to storytell. But you don't have to wait. If you wait, you're going to get passed up for the most part from what you can see in today's world.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. We had an NFT talk, and there's an artist, Blake, who's worked with a bunch of different athletes. And while he was talking about NFTs, he was talking about his process and how he even got into sports and athletes and doing their artwork. And he basically gave, I think it was 3 athletes, he just did their artwork just so they could have for their house for free. One of them, CJ Anderson, who's played for the Broncos. Instantly, he turned around and bought a couple, and then it just spiraled. He did all these other athletes, and now he opened up. I don't know if you guys saw the news in the NFT. TO opened up a gallery of NFTs that he's the one kind of behind. So again, to like your point of your network of like, there's people out there who are willing to do free work, especially if you're just getting into the video space or photography space. You can grab those people to get content, and they're building up their portfolio at the same time, and you just kind of network and grow together. I agree. I'll go to Eric on this one. As far as like starting a new league, there's a lot of obstacles, right? You guys are still looking to finalize venues, but then how do you go in the grassroots of, like you talked about with the Globetrotters, create that viral moment, sell tickets, get awareness, sell tickets. How do you go from the grassroots standpoint of we need people who are going to be in these seats, right? Because I would imagine in the fall time we're anticipating fans
Yep.
in the stadium or arenas wherever you end up. How do you go about the grassroots and how do you get over those obstacles given what you already know?
Yeah, we did that in terms of different audience sets that we're going after and where our priorities are. For us with Premier Rugby Sevens, the number one audience set that is our biggest priority is the rugby community. That was first and foremost, because they will support this event if it's done right and they believe in the product. The other interesting thing is that as you know, as we talk to rugby-based media, both in the U.S. and abroad, every single one of them looked at us and said, "Yeah, we've heard this before, and it's never come to fruition." And I recognize that really early, that we need to build legitimacy with every single thing that we announce. So, what are our things that are legitimate? For number one, first and foremost, was those 8 players we had as part of our biggest announcement. And then from there, tell the stories about why they're legitimate outside of the rugby community. So that was second for us. In terms of a second audience set from a PR perspective, it's the sports industry media. They're the ones that are going to help tell this story from a brand perspective that can get those sponsorships and partnerships that can help our sponsorship team sell those and show that legitimacy. So one of the first embargoed pieces that we had run was in Sportico. That was important. So on day one, we had that ready to go. They ran first, but we also had 7, 8, 9, 10 different rugby publications all going at the same time too, from Rugby World to some of the other ones that are here based in the US. And then from there, once we have that rugby community, and a lot of it's the following of the players and things like that, that's when we're going to start building out that next audience set, which is that North American fan. We're not trying to go after the rugby fan in Australia or New Zealand or England. We're going domestic based rugby fans in the US, definitively, number one, and then sports fans in the US in a certain demographic. Now, could a family absolutely have, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. Could they have fun at an event like this? Absolutely. But you've seen it in Vegas, Tim, this is a party. It is a festival type of atmosphere.
Fiji was there and they were going nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to promote that party atmosphere that, hey, you're going to have a great time if you come to this, even if you've never played rugby, even if you don't know the sport, you've never seen it on TV. You're going to have a great time with this event. And that's going to be in that 21 to 35-year-old range. So when we look at it from a strategic perspective, we're going to keep going and layering those different audience sets. So I talked about nationally. Once we confirm the venue in the city, we'll definitely be honed in on that. It's going to be out of the live event book page. I always say there's never a bad event, there's only a bad deal. And that's the great thing about this league and other leagues similar to this, such as the Premier Lacrosse League comes to mind with what Paul Rabel and those guys are doing, that you can play any venue in the country. You're looking for the best partnership. You could get that partnership from the city, the tourism board, the venue itself, a tenant, the team. So there's that's the other interesting thing about this league is that we'll have some of that flexibility to play wherever we want based on what that local market looks like. Even to say, like, it's more than just saying, oh, there's a certain percentage of rugby fans in this particular market compared to this particular market, but what is the city doing? What other funds could there be coming in from other places? Is there a major sponsor that's headquartered there that's going to partner with us? So we have that flexibility to play anywhere, and that was part of what attracted me to the league, was to have that type of business model.
That's interesting. I'll jump to you, Shane, with this one as far as like the storytelling component to brands. Do you see any of them jump out at you from a brand perspective? Which ones tell the best stories or best at storytelling outside of Nike, outside of obviously you're close to there. But I'll start with you, Shane, first, and then I want to hear from Eric too. But any other brands that stand out from a storytelling standpoint?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of examples across sports, right? There's On Footwear out of, I believe, Switzerland, right? And they blend inspirational story that you might see product and then a product-based story, that has the background, right? So they're providing a service of like, oh yeah, I know what it feels like to be running when it's 30 degrees outside, snow's hitting me in the face, but I still got to put the miles in. So I love what they're doing. There's fun stuff that Athletes United, or sorry, what they're doing with their brand and bringing more of the personal aspect of the players, especially on the volleyball side of what they've done. That's where I experienced it. You're bringing more personality. You're allowing people to get behind the curtain or behind the scenes and realize that they're normal people. Like they're willing to do a TikTok dance out of nowhere, right? Or make fun of themselves or make fun of each other. And that's where today's consumer wants. They don't want everything to be super polished. So it's people like that. Puma, I would say, in a massive way, has done a great reset. We all know they tried to jump into basketball and did all right there. But the fact that they're rolling back into global football, where they've got some original DNA, they have done a good job from an energy perspective to get you connected not only to the sport, but probably to their athletes or to whatever's going on right now. So I would say those are probably three. And then you look at, there's other people from a smaller sort of running specialty that are super good, like hyper locally. Like if you look at Loop Running out of Austin, again, not most people would go see their place, but if you follow running or just cool storytelling on social, dude, you're about what these people are doing because the energy that they're bringing to you and the local aspect, like of helping people, especially during the pandemic. Like they were literally one of the only ones that were open that you can go have a shower, because they used to do run clubs, right? And so they're celebrating that. So I would say those kind of people, because again, they're truly connected to their consumer. Yeah. And it's not all, hey, I just got this new shoe, come buy it. Hey, we got this new sock, come buy it. It's providing some inspiration. And again, coming out of this sort of era that we've been in, is that getting a sense of community and joy. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that. And some of them were doing organically prior. It just throttled up even more because we're like, okay, cool. We were already going away from just the tactical transaction and more to, hey, we're bringing it back. We're struggling just as much as you. And I think, quite honestly, I think there's a lot of people that are doing it. And if you're not, I'm not going to say who, but there's definitely some that haven't. The business itself, you can tell in the reports, they have not realized that they're not connected to their consumer in an authentic way. And the consumers, I sat there and said, yeah, we're good. There's a bunch of other people over here that make me feel better about myself or provide a service without making me a transaction.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Eric, I'll kick it to you in a second. I want to stay right there. You mentioned about Puma. Curious if you had a few $1 billion laying around and you purchased Reebok, as has been recent out there that it is up for sale. There's been a number of people who said that they would want to buy it and what they could potentially do with it. What would you do with Reebok as a brand, knowing where they have, who they have worked with in the past, what they've done in the past? You talk about legacy and Puma going back to the roots. What would you do with Reebok if you had a few billion laying around?
Yeah, just a few dollars. I mean, again, they don't have deep history, but they got history, right? There's history in hip hop. There's history in track and field. There's history in basketball, NBA, right? You think about the dunk contest that outside of Michael Jordan and Dominique that everyone thinks about is when D put his arm up. Quite honestly, now we see our kids do that move, but when he went up and did the no look dunk, like you need to celebrate that, right? And quite honestly, they came in and were like, hey, forget you, Adi, forget you, Nike. We're the rebels, right? Nike was the rebels to Adi back in the day, right? Then Reebok comes in and they were the rebels. They sort of lost that fervor for it. And there's still people that love the brand or love, their logo. They just have to get back to it. And that's why you see people like Baron Davis and those guys that want to get back into it. They're like, yo, the community wants it. The culture wants it. We just need you bureaucrats or you numbers people to get out and let the people run it. So no, there's massive opportunity. And this is globally, obviously here in the States would be the biggest an easiest win, but globally, if you think about what they did, remember when they did the Dan and Dan thing, when unfortunately those guys didn't necessarily perform the way they could have, either get into the Olympics or in the Olympics, that whole campaign. So there's history there that people are like, yeah, I remember them. They were the rebels. They were the ones who were willing to be like, hey, we're going to go out and do some weird stuff or unique stuff. Like, think about the storytelling from a Dan and Dan. There's people doing that now. They were doing it back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I think it's an easy win. It's bad for my portfolio personally, but it's valuable because, again, the culture is there and you love competition. So we love it when people like Adi, Puma, or whatever there, because we're getting people the product, but it makes all of us compete with each other. And as we know, if everyone wins or gets a little badge that says, hey, you participated, the creativity and trying to better either your product line or better the service isn't going to happen. So the fact that when you get these people to rise up, it actually makes the whole game get much better. And especially when you're talking about the brand side of it and the marketing, right? We throttled Adi for a while, especially in the global football side. And then Adi came back and said, okay, these next years we're getting you. It just, the best part about it is the end consumer is the one that's the benefit of it.
Yep.
And that's the most exciting part.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Eric, do you have any ones that come to mind as far as like storytelling?
Yeah. So
outside of the ones that you've worked on.
Yeah, for sure. No, I have a 9-year-old daughter. And then you have Premier Rugby Sevens that's going to be, have the women's teams as well. So I've been paying a little closer attention, but I didn't need to because they're doing a great job. Both the WNBA, I'll give a shout out to, and the National Women's Soccer League has done a tremendous job in the last 18 months, even pre-pandemic, with their growth and making a name for themselves, on and off the field, has been really impressive to watch. That's then led to, expansion franchises like Angel City FC, where you are, Tim, and I'm sure you saw that announcement when they came out. That video was tremendous. It was like one A-list celebrity after the next that announced that they're part of the ownership group. And I talked about legitimacy with PR7s. I think that they needed that too. They needed that legitimacy so that if they just weren't on, repeat on, a low budget app or a broadcast, a couple years ago with very few people in the stands, they needed that legitimacy. So now you bring in this ownership group. I think coming out of the pandemic, they're really poised to, and obviously these investors agree, but they're really poised to take off and make a name for themselves. And, and I see it with the 9-year-old girls that look up to the players that were in the World Cup or the Olympics coming up, that then it translates back at home in their hometown with NWSL. And, I think they're onto something. They're doing a great job.
Yeah, I agree. I love what they're doing. I think that, I don't know if you saw the softball World Series had like 2.2 million viewers the other day. We talked about that earlier with Athletes Unlimited. And I think even just the amplifying those sports and making them like that orange hoodie alone, like Drake was wearing it the other day, but people are talking about it, that helps amplify the brand in itself. Right.
Yeah.
And I think when NIL opens up, which we had just had that, you said you were on that talk earlier. Yep. I think that will even, like your daughter, I have a 5-year-old daughter. I think they'll see more awareness. They'll see these people more, but also because brands are going to be uplifting them, because at the end of the day, they're businesses, right? So they need to uplift their partners, their athletes, because they want to drive awareness and drive revenue. But I think that's a kind of a win-win for everyone involved. I agree. I like what they're both doing. Again, we're almost out of time here too, but I got one more question if you guys are ready.
Yeah, can I follow up on that real quick though, Tim? Yeah. I think that's a great point. In my world, especially the female or young athletes perspective, the data shows that about 13, 14, they check out, like they make a really tough decision, like, hey, I'm going to be able to go play in college or whatever. NIL now opens that aperture to where they don't have to make an impact on the court, on the pitch, whatever. They can actually make an impact out of it. So I love that. And when you bring in Angel City, that again brings a hyper local, granted it's a massive hyper local area, you now have kids or girls that will aspire because they can now touch it, where maybe the Women's World Cup, when none of them are in that area, they're aspirational, right? Now they can actually go and see a girl trip or miss a pass or whatever. It's going to be a massive win for our female athletes down the way. And quite honestly, the quality of US as we battle for Olympic golds and all that stuff going forward. So I'm with you guys.
No, great input. Are you guys, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or want to talk about it. Do you guys have a strategy in place for NIL with athlete specifics? Can you get any details around that?
I don't think so. I'm sure there's some partners that are helping support, people that we have as assets, whether it's Duke, Syracuse, those guys. I'm sure there's conversations coming from the schools and the universities. I would say we're probably there to support. We're not driving. There's enough other stuff, whether you own the NBA relationship, the individual athletes or whatever. You're definitely pushing the sports marketing athletes that aren't, say, the LeBron James, to sit there and go, hey, there's an opportunity, and utilize our umbrella of 1 billion followers to what everything you guys have been talking about and your brother's been talking about for the last few weeks. Utilize that umbrella that you're part of to grow who you are. So when you're done with your career, people are still coming to you and wanting you to be part of their business or be a sponsor or whatever, because you built a brand to what we talked about is who you are, not just what you did.
Right. You're building that community yourself as a brand. All right. Well, we're almost done. Let me get at this one last question here before I let you guys run. There's all these different, we've had startups on here. There's all these technologies. We've got products, we've got services. What product, service, technology excites you in the sports world? Eric, we just had on multicasting. I don't know if you saw that one. It's a startup where basically the audience becomes the streamer of the broadcast. Stuff like that could be cool from an awareness, but also revenue side. Shane, I know obviously like Nike has done stuff with like Apple and the wearables and stuff. Is there anything that's out there technology wise that excites you guys?
I think you're going to continue to see the virtual stuff get pulled in, or the AR. I mean, if you're talking about a product perspective, right? If I can't go to a store, let's say we have another pandemic 5 years from now, right? But I still am able to play or exercise, but I can't tell what shoe. AR literally can have you spin a shoe right in front of you, right? You can see the outsole, you see the upper, and the brilliance of it from a color perspective, it doesn't look fake. So I would say from a commerce or getting product to people, AR is where they're going. And obviously pull that in with AI, right? That side of it is just an unlock. And it's an unlock for the consumers. Yeah, it helps the brands. But it's an unlock for a consumer, especially when you're talking about a sport like rugby, you're talking about basketball, soccer. These are all things that if you give me a bad shoe and wreck my feet, I'm done. I can't play and I can't get paid to play. You know what I mean? So that kind of stuff, from seeing what the shoe is or technically trying the shoe on virtually, right? Like that's an unlock that will save everybody. So that's where I see it going, and probably is going to be sooner than later.
I've heard a number of people talk about that. I personally haven't like seen any of the software or AI. I do think that could be a game changer though. Eric?
Curious to see what happens on the broadcasting side here in the next couple of years. Obviously, there's a lot of tests here. The Clippers just did their kids cast a couple games ago, which was similar to what the NFL did with Nickelodeon, in the playoffs last year. I think that's just the beginning. You got to figure out a way to engage with the youth that are used to seeing, a 30-second highlight or a minute highlight package. How do you get them to sit down and watch the entire game from beginning to end, whether it's shortening the games? I mean, obviously Rugby Sevens has that already in place. But what's that mean for other sports like baseball and others? And then, certainly on the gaming front, I will give a shout out to Jock Market. One of the interesting things that the latest investors loved about Jock Market was the time in the app, and you're seeing it at 90 minutes out of a game. So more than half of an NBA game, they're on their second screen in Jock Market, figuring out when they want to sell and when they want to buy from other users those shares of those athletes that they're watching on the primary screen. So how's that going to marry with the broadcast in the future to make sure people can watch from tip off to the end of the game, particularly for this next generation coming up.
That's wild. 90 minutes. I remember when Snapchat was just starting to peak up and they were like, you're holding down on this for 10, 15 seconds, whatever it was. And that they were saying that's why it was so valuable, because you're physically holding something and you're engaged for that 10 to 15 seconds. 90 minutes is outrageous.
Yeah, it is. And that's, they got that round of funding, and that was one of the big points that they liked. And it's just that, the growth from there. So I could see as we advance into the future and as they grow, figuring out, arrangements with broadcast partners that'll be mutually beneficial, both on the exposure side for Jock Market, but then on the broadcast side to say, hey, it's more like right now I'm in the Philadelphia market. So obviously I'm in the hotbed of sports betting. And you see the ads, you see the live line at halftime. There's so much more opportunity there on that front as more and more states become legal.
Yeah, it's a little less taboo the last couple of years to talk about that openly, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the time today. I'm open to having another one of these, just you two. This is great. If you guys need anything from us or want to put together something, a roundtable or anything that can help you guys as well, we're down for it here. That's why we're creating this. But again, appreciate the time today, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
I appreciate your seat at the table. Eric, pleasure meeting you, mate.
Same to you, Shane. Thanks, Tim.